Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are again, Courageous Conversations, and we're not alone. But we've got an invader. We'll introduce him in just a moment, but we'll take a moment to thank all of our listeners for joining us again in our Courageous Conversations. We're coming up on 4 years, Phil, in June of having these cross the fence type talks. Thank you to Nationwide for your support, and thank you to Nicole for trying to keep us reeled in. Phil, always good to see you again.
Good to see you again. What's going on in your world before we get to our illustrious?
Oh, I don't know. I've just got so many things on my to-do list. I just really wish I could just throw it in the fire, but we don't have a fire at the moment. Maybe I just throw it out in the rain. No, all is good. Just being busy. I'm busy being me, and which is ill-defined. When somebody asks what I'm up to, I basically say the last part of my life is going to be focused on education and improving the profession going forward. So that's really where everything on my list is all about.
Well, I can't think of a more noble cause. I just got back from DC, attending the annual spring meeting for the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges, and it was good to be back there. Now I'm a plebe again, starting all over, working myself back up. Now I think I know what I want to be when I grow up.
Older?
Yeah, I just want to survive. That's all,
I think you've got a certain level of masochism in there, but that's okay. You start one and now you're going to start another. Your mom's in her 90s. I could see Phil being the dean of a vet school in his 90s.
Phil can't see that, so let's not even try to that kind of caricature.
Do you want to introduce our guest? What should we do here, Phil?
I think you should go ahead and introduce him. Let's dive right in.
All right. Well, our guest is somebody many of you in the social media world may know. When we started these podcasts a number of years ago, he was a frequent guest, some of which his recordings were included, some of which wasn't. And he is an individual that both Dr. Nelson and I have tremendous amount of respect for. He's given a tremendous amount to the veterinary profession and continues to do so. I'm thrilled that we were able to reel him in, because if he's not on television and he's not on an airplane and he's not in a meeting that he and I are in meetings together all the time, he's on social media and he's trying to influence the profession. He's trying to influence the future of the profession and educate. So Dr. Courtney Campbell, not everybody knows who you are. You are a real media and social media hero to many, many in the veterinary field. So Dr. Campbell, if you don't mind if I'll call you Courtney, thank you for joining us.
It is an absolute pleasure and an honor. And I got to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever heard the word hero and my name used in the same sentence before. So this is a new experience for me. I almost felt like you were introducing somebody else. Like either you were introducing yourself or Dean Nelson. I'm like, okay, now that seems more appropriate for the word hero, but I'll take it. And like I said, it's a tremendous honor.
Depends on how you look at this. I see you as one of the leaders of the youth movement in the veterinary profession, and when it comes to leaders, and I see Dr. Weinstein and I as similar choices that we're going to have for president. You can't have a moniker like hero too soon.
Well, I appreciate you, man. I really do. And honestly, it's just you double down and you say youth movement. I tell you what, there are certain days where you don't feel so young. But I do agree. Here's what I will say, and I'll completely concede this, that I like being at that intersection where I grew up in an analog world and we essentially became adults in a digital world. And I think that having that perspective, or what, the popular zeitgeist calls a zennial, where they can sort of straddle both worlds, gives you that perspective where you say, hey, listen, I grew up where there was no social media, but I understand the utility of it. I find that different generations where they're just, particularly the younger generation, are like, wait, there was a time where there was no Google? There was a time where there was no social media or there was no internet. For a lot of them, because their lives are inextricably bound to that, it's a difficult mental hurdle. For example, when I was in vet school, my focus was graduating vet school, right? And trying to be the best clinician that I possibly can. I think that students today have a similar focus, but a lot of them have a side hustle, and then they have side hustles for their side hustle. And it becomes this sort of gig economy where you just find these gigs and they've got other tasks or other things that occupy their mind besides just graduating vet school. Like I said, I do enjoy being at that intersection.
Well, I mean, you came up in the social media era. Phil and I were lucky to have electricity.
I was about to say that, when you and I came up, the word analog hadn't even been coined yet.
No.
Just straight horse and buggy. That's it, huh? Yeah.
So Courtney, are you still flying high after UConn's win in basketball last week?
Unbelievable. Listen, this is coming from somebody who doesn't watch a lot of NCAA basketball, but even I know when Ray Allen calls this UConn team the best ever, that's when you really got to pay attention. You know what I mean? And basketball, let's be honest, it has a complete resurgence, whether it's UConn being the best ever team or the first time the women's game, has ever been outwatched or had a higher watch rate than the men's game. I mean, basketball is really having a resurgence, and it's kind of beautiful to watch because sport is something that I believe unites us all, or it should unite us all. And it's something that you can't really debate about, right? Not too much in the sense of there's a scoreboard and whoever scores the most points should be the winner, versus a lot of things that we have now where facts are disputed, events are disputed, evidence is disputed, right? Of course, you can argue about who's the best player in the league and those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, there's a time clock, there's a scoreboard, and there's something kind of pure about that at the end of the day.
That's a good analogy. NCAA tournament actually was a good representation of the political and human condition in America. And what was satisfying and probably even distracting was that there was no one undermining the veracity of the scoreboard.
Right.
There was no one questioning the honesty of the refs. They may have been questioning the eyesight of the refs, but not the honesty of the refs. And the score was actually the score.
Right.
Because everybody saw the scores being made.
Yes.
And there were no alternative scores promoted.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you have your scoreboard. I have my alternative scoreboard. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Right,
I disallowed those 2 points,
right.
Or I disallowed 2 points three minutes ago. I've got to tell you about it. It was a good reflection of how well a system can work.
And
go by the rules.
And even in one of the arenas, I think it was in Portland, the 3-point line was different from one side to the other.
Yeah, I heard about
that. Yes,
they
had to correct it that day.
But the coaches agreed that since you switch sides at the half, it should make a difference. And the fact that two people from two groups who wanted to win the game could come to a consensus and still play the game without having it to go to a third party or the Supreme Court was huge.
Yes. And the fact that they came to the rational decision that since both teams have to play under the same conditions, it's fair.
Right.
It's still fair,
Yeah, not only is it fair, but because we're both playing under the same conditions, it behooves us all to sort of create something that is amicable and that we reach peace on and move forward versus getting mired in contentious arguments and disagreeable pursuits. And you're exactly right. Is that it just is like, hey, how can we all benefit from us reaching this compromise? You are right. I will say this. I mean, obviously, all of the all of the intimations and takeaways that we have from those games, I think at the end of the day, it does underscore one main point, which is for all those people who think that sports don't matter, that it's just a game, you're obviously not watching the right thing, because if all you see is a game, then you're missing a lot.
Well, you're definitely not appreciating the full depth of the significance of sports.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with somebody and they said, so what do you do to distract yourself? Because like Phil and like yourself, it's very easy to bury yourself in your work. And they said, one of the things that I distract myself with, I go to the movies with my wife, and that's one thing. But the other thing is really sports, whether it is going to a game or watching one on TV, and especially if it's a team that I am fully committed to. Sports to me are a way to separate myself out from all of the issues that I deal with every day. And so I really think, to me, sports are therapeutic in many ways.
Interesting.
Well,
That's a really interesting perspective. I don't want to necessarily take your mindset off into a different tangent or kind of get into the weeds too much here, but I do wonder if there's elements about a team sport that we're able to ascribe to that therapy that you're talking about, that therapeutic index, the fact that we're able to have some really salient takeaways versus individual sports, whether that be tennis, track and field, combat sports, whatever they are. Do you think that there's similar takeaways that we could glean from individual sports?
of course, and I think that the takeaway is that you understand which one you're playing. Um, if you are a team, if you are on a team, you better be a team player.
Right. Right.
And you should understand which team, what the goal of the team. And when we take when we make a political comparison, this is the discussion we're having when we say party over country or country over party.
Right.
Which team is more important here? That the best team won in both conditions. All the teams had stars, but the team that played the best among all team members, that was best able to substitute the team for the good of the team, are the ones that eventually won. And I think that's what we have to remember, or at least think of, when we look at car crashes that are occurring in Congress over things that we should understand. We should all be on the same side of the highway here for certain issues, if we're truly dealing with moving the country forward, as opposed to moving the party forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So when it comes to a team concept, Phil played tennis in high school, and you're playing singles or doubles, and whether you're in the first three singles teams or the first three doubles teams, and maybe you're the fourth of each, you are there supporting other members of your team, and you practice with the team, and every point that you get is for the team. And that's the important thing. My daughter was a swimmer, and she was very good in individual strokes, but she was also eager to participate in the relays. And so I think it's this veterinary medicine, and since we're all veterinarians, veterinary medicine is a team sport in many ways, because we all act together for the common good of our patients and our clients. In many ways, politics is an individual sport where people pretend to be part of a team, but they're really taking care of themselves first.
And in honesty, civilization is a team sport. And I give a talk on the higher purpose. Everybody essentially works individually in some regard, but it is that individual accomplishment that adds to the team score. And you just have to understand that. You have to understand your role in society. A veterinary hospital becomes successful because of its team approach, but the services it provides is part of the movement, the team moving society forward as well. And protecting the public health, not just the health of the animals that we serve. Boy, we've taken this.
It's really interesting just because, listen, I mean, sometimes you can, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it, may not repeat itself, but it rhymes, and when you look at if you go all the way back, I'm talking just from our own evolutionary roots, just answering a very simple question. How did we sort of outcompete Neanderthals, right? What was it about the Neanderthals that they didn't win and Homo sapiens did win? And I'm no anthropologist, but from their studies, from scholarship on this topic, what they found is that when you look at primates and their interactions, sometimes their interactions and their structure can be tremendously violent. Constant combat, constant arguments, constant fights, right? And they found that was a commonality among Neanderthals, right? They constantly were warring. But Homo sapiens, and I know this is hard to believe, but we're more peaceful. And they found that when you're more peaceful, you tend to share ideas. You tend to share farming practices or hunting practices. You tend to share housing practices. So it's hard to share ideas and information when you're constantly warring with each other, when you're constantly fighting with each other. And so if you look back to our very roots of how we even here, it's that whole spirit of teamwork that undergirds us as human beings, just as storytelling is at a very central core to our makeup. So is working in teams and being peaceful with one another and being social with one another is, I believe, sort of a core component of our DNA.
Well, let's call it a community, because really that's the ability to work together, collaborate together, and support each other is a lot of what has come through evolution.
Right.
Well, that definitely does not dismiss the importance of not burning down the house every time you turn around either.
Right.
This violence and destruction doesn't just distract us from positive ideas that move us forward. It also prevents us from starting over again every time you turn around.
Good.
That's probably the major benefit we get from cooperation and collaboration.
I completely agree. Yeah.
I want to let Courtney talk a little bit about himself, because he's in many ways, besides being a hero,
Jeez.
he's unique. I picked on or pointed out Connecticut because Courtney grew up in Connecticut and went to undergrad, if I'm not incorrect, at UConn Storrs.
Oh, no, I wish I did. I went to University of Delaware, but I tell you what, man, University of Delaware was interesting. And here's why, because I grew up in a very small town, as you noted, right? Burlington, Connecticut. I think the population is 9,000 people. I think everybody knows that if you're from Connecticut, sometimes we'll go by the moniker nutmeggers. And in Connecticut, there's just a lot of woods and trees. If you were to see like a picture of me, I always, would have on like a plaid shirt, like, black version of the brawny man. I'd be chopping wood outside, raking leaves, lifting up stones, trying to find salamanders and stuff like that. And that was kind of how I explored the environment. There were two words that you really didn't want to say in my household. And those two words were, I'm bored. If you said I'm bored, oh man, you need to watch out. There were leaves to rake, there was a yard to clean, there was vacuuming to do. So you just stayed busy. You stayed busy, and that's kind of how I explored the natural world. So now the question becomes, I want to be independent, right? I'm starting to become a young man and I want to get independent, but not that independent. I didn't want to go all the way across the country. So I said, let me just go 4 hours away to Delaware, which is just far enough so that I feel independent, but I could always make it home if things got bad. So that was certainly the motivation. But on a very serious note, University of Delaware did have a university farm where I would have never have been enrolled in the beef and sheep unit, the dairy units, where they made their own ice cream. I was in the avian unit at the height of foot and mouth disease at the time, and as it was spreading throughout the world, throughout the globe. So there was a lot that I learned on that University of Farm, which was probably one of the main reasons why I pursued that university. And if there's anybody listening right now who's deciding, like, I don't know which undergrad to go to, think about a school in which you can get hands-on experience, either at the school or nearby, or it's integrated within the curriculum, because that, I think, is one of the biggest benefits you can get from an undergraduate education.
Absolutely. Growing up in Burlington, looking at salamanders and walking around with your axe and your plaid shirt, is that where the shoulders and pectorals come from? Is that the axe and chopping down trees in the backyard?
It's all atrophied, man. It's all atrophied. It's like now everything's skinny, but yeah, man, you had to have functional strength out there.
So what about Burlington, Connecticut, and salamanders and everything else said I want to be a veterinarian? Because I got to believe there weren't a lot of people who looked like you who were veterinarians in Burlington, Connecticut.
There weren't, right? And I do believe that is not to get too high-minded about this word hope, but I do think if we were to pause for a second and think, what does hope actually mean? Right? Hope to me means a reorientation of your spirit. Hope means believing in a future that you don't necessarily see clear evidence that this future could become a reality. And that's exactly what I saw, in Burlington. I certainly didn't see any veterinarians that looked like me. We had one veterinarian in town. Shout out to Dr. Eschrick, fantastic veterinarian. But in my neighborhood, I knew that I wanted to do something related to medicine. And I knew that medicine was the key. And I said, well, if you want to pursue a career in medicine, then what model do you want to practice medicine on? If it's humans, be a physician. If it's animals, be a veterinarian. If it's feet, be a podiatrist, and so on. But I knew that I wanted to pursue veterinary medicine. And there was this magazine by the National Wildlife Foundation. The name of the magazine is called Ranger Rick Magazine. And Ranger Rick was a raccoon. And Ranger Rick just talked to you all about the natural world in this magazine as a raccoon. And I remember maybe I was 7 years old, and I wrote Ranger Rick. And I couldn't believe that he wrote me back. I got a postcard in the mail, and my mom said, "Hey, Courtney, there's mail for you." Me, an 8-year-old, getting mail from the post office? You got to be kidding me. I looked at it. It was a postcard directly from Ranger Rick. He was answering the question that I wrote him, which was, Ranger Rick, why do dogs have whiskers? And Ranger Rick explained every reason why dogs had whiskers. I said, oh, man, if I could be as smart as this raccoon, then I'm going to be something. And yeah, I was off to the races after that. But I do agree with you 100% that despite not having role models, despite not having mentors, despite not having representation of what your dreams look like, you have to sort of reorient your spirit towards hope. And that is something that I have to say is a step towards progress, because a lot of young people may not have to deal with that through evidence like social media or through pathway programs or on TV or however they're consuming content. They may not have to contend with not having, seeing somebody that looks like them pursue a career that they love.
So what made you, let's take your path from the Blue Hens of Delaware to Southern California. What was the next step after Delaware, and how difficult was that transition from Delaware to whatever the next steps were?
Yeah, so when I was at Delaware, I loved it. I had a lot of people at University of Delaware who were basically from around where I was from. You say, oh man, Delaware, what's there? How is that ever interesting? But remember, University of Delaware has people from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island, Massachusetts, right? So basically they're, and of course, Connecticut, and Virginia and stuff like that, and Philadelphia. So you have people that are around you who remind you a lot of your hometown. Well, now you flash forward, now you go to vet school. You're in the deep South, the Bible Belt, Tuskegee University in Alabama. That's a far cry from Connecticut. In fact, I would tell people I was from Connecticut, and at least 50% of the time they would say, "Where's that?" And I would say, "It's a state." And they would say, oh, okay. And then they would go to parties and they'd say, hey, y'all, I want you to meet Courtney Campbell. He's from Cincinnati. I'm like, no, Connecticut. Oh. And then, of course, the obligatory joke, wait, Black people live in Connecticut, right? So you would have to contend with a lot of these comments in the deep South, and it took some adjustment. And so I'm going to be honest with you, a point of vulnerability here. I actually was feeling down on myself for about 6 to 8 months. I didn't like it. I wanted to go home. I didn't really appreciate Alabama. I just wanted to go back up Northeast. And I said, you got to do something, man. What's going to turn you around? And so you know what I did? I literally enmeshed myself in the Tuskegee community. I said, you've got to make this your home. And I tried out for 2 theater productions at Tuskegee Repertory Theater Company. One was on Booker T. Washington. And then I also was in Auburn Theater Department, which is about 13 miles away, which the production theater did a play called Strange Fruit, which is, if you know about that particular song, it's a very graphic depiction of slaves being lynched. That was a really powerful play because we had actors playing white supremacists. You had, freed slaves. I mean, it was a very I'll put it this way. The production was so powerful that they said after the play, there will be an hour of question and answer. And everybody stayed afterwards, right? Because they wanted to ask the actors, how were you able to play those roles? So that's what I did. That's what made me feel at home. And it leads us into the modern day. And here's where we connect to the very modern day. When I was at Tuskegee, I was convinced I wanted to be a radiologist. I knew that was the path for me. I said, man, I'm going to be a radiologist. Why did I want to be a radiologist? Well, I had met a teacher, a professor, who I thought was pretty dynamic and so freaking smart. I said, man, this guy's so smart. This is what I want to do. His knowledge is so extensive. And that professor is now running for president of the AVMA, right? So it was kind of interesting because I always blame Dr. Michael Bailey for having me pursue radiology initially. And then I woke up one day and said, I don't think radiology is for me. So I always caution young people, you're going to meet outstanding mentors in your life. You're going to meet outstanding people. Make sure you fall in love with the discipline and not the actual person. Because if you're going to meet so many cool people, that you'll get convinced that's what you want to do when really you need to be focused on the actual task at hand.
So, Courtney, I wanted to tell you that the experience you had at first when you first got to Tuskegee is more a reflection of the isolation of the South.
Yes.
Than it is the place where you came from.
I hear you.
It's more a reflection of the of the timeliness, the time at the time that you were there. It's more a reflection of the narrowness of the educational process in the South.
Yes.
Than it is a reflection of you or where you're from. I understand we tend to internalize first and say, what's wrong with me? We have those things first, but this was more of a I can't believe I don't, it was rather hard to understand what was beyond the Mason-Dixon line.
Right. Yes.
or to even be aware of it. I think the Great Migration to Chicago was evidence of that. It was that was kind of our march to the West, and all of a sudden we reached back and pulled others with us. But for those of us who stayed in the South, we had to overcome some real rigidity in our in curricular offerings and things like that. It really resonated to me how you may have been received when you got here, and wondering what the experience could even have been like.
Yeah, it's thank you for mentioning that. And the word rigidity is something that it resonates with me too. And thank you for bringing that up, because this is obviously talked about. We don't talk about this outside of the so to speak family, but you also don't want anybody to tell you how you should be Black, right? And that rigidity, that sort of that narrow focus, or that narrow set of qualifications, a card, so to speak, your card, was certainly brought up quite frequently, whether it's the type of music you listen to, the way you talk, the vocabulary you use, the way you conduct yourself. I just firmly believe that, Black people in general, we are not a monolith. We come in all different shapes and sizes and colors and personalities and interests. And I would never, after that experience that I certainly had in the South, I would never sort of dictate to somebody else on how I think they should exemplify, showcase, highlight their Blackness. They live in their true sense and their truth, and we celebrate them for being an individual. So that is another thing that, obviously, like I said, we sometimes talk about this within the family, but it is very, very poignant. And that word rigidity is so important, because it can feel tremendously isolated.
I think that form of rigidity is even expressed through how you express your Blackness. The fact that we discuss how you express your Blackness rather than your humanity,
right,
is nothing but another version of that rigidity.
So true.
It is nothing but part of the spectrum of that rigidity. It is. You may not think of it this way, but it is the same as who is a true Republican. Does the MAGA demographic truly represent the Republican Party, or is Ronald Reaganism the true Republican Party? It's our inability to accept spectrum, and that creates the problems we have in politics and in human relations.
And what's interesting about that is that the Democratic Party has always been a coalition party, right? You've got your blue dogs, your Nancy Pelosi's, but then you also have your AOCs. You've got your, I know Bernie Sanders is an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats 99% of the time. So I think at the end of the day, the Democratic Party has always been a coalition party. And so getting everybody unified is sometimes a challenge. But I have to be honest, from what I've seen, I see more unity on the Democratic side than I do on the Republican side, despite some of the protests that we're seeing against the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, at the end of the day, you're exactly right. Where if you look at it through a political lens, you're right. There should be a spectrum, and that's what this is all about.
Well, I appreciate you letting me be a part of the family and sharing the stories with me, because I am the minority in the room today.
Yes.
And what's
you're always part of the family.
You notice I didn't even attempt to talk about what it means to be white.
Well, and I'm not about to start to attempt to talk about what it means to be Black.
Yes.
So I'd like to know what the
Please let us know what it
is.
please let us know what it feels, what it's like. What's the rigid framework to look through what it means to be white? Yeah.
Yeah, that's outside of my job description.
Okay.
I'll see if I can hire somebody to do that for
All
me.
right.
And it's interesting because again, just looking at differences, I have two boarded specialists on the call with me. In fact, I am a minority in a lot of different ways in this conversation. And in many ways, you both stand out by being outstanding in your fields. But it also meant that you had a much more difficult climb to get to those positions. There are not a lot of people of color in the veterinary field who are boarded specialists. And I have to give you both a big shout out for taking the task and going to the level that you have and making that accomplishment, because I do think many people don't recognize that. And it's part of what we in this profession need to look at as we go forward is how do we start to increase and enhance the diversity within all aspects of this profession. So kudos to both of you.
So
Well, thank you, man, for saying that. I appreciate you.
Was Dr. Ellis Hall there when you were at Tuskegee?
No, I do not. I unfortunately did not have Dr. Ellis Hall there.
Okay. Well, Dr. Ellis Hall was a radiologist who
Okay.
actually trained your radiology mentor.
Okay.
But I wanted to introduce his definition of a farmer.
Okay.
A farmer is a man outstanding in his field.
Now that sounded like a dad joke.
Yes. I like that one where you let it marinate just for a couple of milliseconds and then it just hits you just right, Oh man, that's perfect, man.
So,
man.
I'm just curious, Courtney. You said that, and we were talking about spectrum and all sorts of different things, but you went down to the deep south. It was a very unique and uncomfortable situation at first, and many people didn't even know Connecticut was a state. Did you have the opportunity to bring some classmates to Connecticut and show them some of the Northeast and what it looks like while you were going through school, and give them a chance to see that Connecticut is a state?
I thought you were going to show them what freedom really meant.
Yes, man. It's getting spicy. I like this podcast. It's getting spicy, man.
I couldn't go there, though. I had to let Phil go there. So
yeah, we need to make a couple Confederacy references. I think we'll be good. We'll hit bingo. We'll hit spicy bingo. No, I think. Listen, that would have been amazing. There's all kinds of anecdotes and jokes and things like that I experienced when I was down there, but I didn't have the opportunity to bring any of the students back up to Connecticut. It is interesting that people in the South, they are very cognizant of the fact that there are different personalities and dynamics in other regions of the country. You know what I mean? Where they can tell that you are not, quote, Southern, and it goes beyond just your lingo and beyond your accent. I do remember going to the cafeteria one time, and I just asked a very simple question. I said, is this the cafeteria where we can redeem our cards or food cards or those sorts of things? And she just said to me, what part of California are you from? I said, I'm not from California. I'm from Connecticut. Why do you ask? She said, because you acting all excited and stuff. And I said, okay, all right. So apparently that my energy level to this particular individual was more than what she was accustomed to. Now, obviously, that's not something I can attribute to everybody in this house, but just the way I was acting, I was a little bit too much for her, is what she was trying to say politely. And so what I was now, at that time, if you had said to me at one point in your life, you will end up living in California, I would have said you were crazy. I would have been like, why would I ever go over there? So I think at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. If you can bring people from different parts of the nation to different parts, to other parts of the country, it's eye-opening. It really is, just because of how big the United States is. So when I have somebody from an international student come over, yes, I've been to the United States. I say, well, where'd you go? Oh, I went to Dallas, Texas. Okay, well, listen. That's a great and wonderful city with great people there. But I just don't want you to feel like that is emblematic of the entire United States. You know what I mean? So, you always got to ask them when you say, oh, I visited the United States. You ask them, where did you go? Because they could have distinctly different experiences.
Well, it's funny when you're in Europe, and you travel from France to Germany, you know you're in two distinct different states.
Right.
And yet you've traveled no further than from Mississippi to Alabama,
There you go.
in terms
Yeah.
of geography and distance. And so to think that a country as large as the United States you could the American experience from wherever you drop in on the United States is something means you don't understand geography, you don't understand the human culture, you don't understand the impact of how humanity interacts with environment.
So true.
And so those are the things that I find are uniquely interesting in how we interpret things and how we adopt our myopic views relative to anything you want to talk about. So, Courtney, tell us about what happened to you after you left Tuskegee. How did you decide? How did you decide which discipline, since radiology wasn't the discipline you liked? How did you decide on surgery?
Certainly, I knew that ultimately, at that point in my career, I knew that I needed to pursue a specialty. Radiology was my focus. I knew that there was a path towards radiology, and that included doing a rotating internship. So when I started my rotating internship in Orlando, Florida, at Affiliated Veterinary Specialists, I had worked with some of the greatest radiologists in the nation, right behind, Donald Thrall and those guys, who Donald Thrall trained some of these guys. And so I said, all right, well, I'm working with some great radiologists, Kit Berry, and I'm doing some research on bone scans. And right around, I want to say February, March, let's just call it Judgment Day. Let's use that terminology, because that is the day that everybody waits for the match. And so we're familiar. It is axiomatic to say the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. Because if you're on match day and you're on the positive end of that, you're popping champagne bottles, you're going out for dinner with all of your intern colleagues. Or if you're on the negative receiving end, you are, cloistered away in your room, sort of licking your wounds. And I was on the negative receiving end of that. So that the pain doesn't necessarily stop there, right? There's like this sort of languishing trauma or enduring trauma, emotional trauma, because after that day, you'll have people say, hey, Courtney, what are you doing this summer? Or what are you doing after this? What are you doing after the internship? What are you doing this summer? What are you doing this summer? And because you have to keep repeating, oh, I didn't match. Oh, I didn't match. Oh, I didn't match. Eventually, you just get tired of giving people the same bad news. And you almost feel tempted to literally make something up. So I decided to get creative. Right around that time, and this show is going to show you how old I am. Right around that time, there was an increasing amount of attention being paid towards surgical internships. And this is an additional year of specialty internship. I joke that it's indentured servitude. It's not. Obviously, it's a very productive learning environment, but it's a specialty internship. And I realized that of the 8 residents that applied to the Animal Medical Center of Southern California, the Animal Medical Center in New York, 8 out of the 10 had done something called a surgical internship. Now, by the way, it's a prerequisite to getting a residency. You can't get one without one. So I was like, okay. It's nearly impossible to get a residency without a surgical internship. But in any case, that was a relatively new thing. So I said to myself, well, is there something called a radiology internship? And a lot of people are like, no, I don't think I've ever heard of that. I don't think that's the case. And so instantly in my mind, I said, all right, well, there's the opportunity. So I literally started cold calling universities and private practices. And I had to convince them of 2 things. One, to create this new position that nobody's ever heard of called a radiology internship. And 2, I was the best person for this brand new position that they were going to create. So I called, right? And one particular school did bite on it. They bit on that idea and they said, so wait a minute, you're telling me that you're going to be an intern and then a 3-year residency. So it'd essentially be a 4-year residency. I said, thinking on the spot, even though I hadn't thought through it that clearly. I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. They said, we like it. We like that idea, and we're going to accept you. You're going to be our first radiology intern. I got off the phone. I was on cloud 9. Now, when I couldn't wait for the next person to ask me, so what are you doing next year? So what are you doing this summer? And I would sing it like a canary. Oh, I'm going to be a radiology intern. A radiology intern? What's that? And I would explain to everybody with this big old smile on my face. And right around then, the economy started a little bit of a free fall. Just a little bit. Like there were sort of tangible indicators that the economy may start heading in a wrong direction. And a lot of schools were experiencing budgetary shortfalls. And so they were looking at spreadsheets. And I think what essentially happened is they must have been in a room and they were looking at a spreadsheet and they're like, where are we going to make cuts? And they said, well, what's this new position? You have this money allocated for a radiology intern. What's that? And they're like, oh, this blah, blah, blah. They had to give an explanation. They said, let's cut that. So they gave me a call.
What year was this?
This was 2007, around there. Okay. 2006, 2007. Essentially they called me back and they said, Courtney, we want to apologize, but we won't be able to take a radiology intern this year. So I said, so close. I went back up to Connecticut. And honestly, even though I felt dejected, and this is something I talk to young students all the time, there's this slang term, obviously, young people use is taking L's, right? Oh, we don't take L's. We don't take losses. These L's that you take in life, sometimes they can turn out to be the best thing that ever happens to you. If you feel like you're taking an L, remember that this could be converted into something that is outstanding. And for me, that particular experience, that L that I seemingly took, what turned out to be the best ever, because I went back into Connecticut. I got to see my family. I worked for a year and I rediscovered that surgery was my true passion and radiology was not my true passion. And I was off to the races pursuing a surgical residency. So had I not experienced that L, I potentially would have been a radiologist, which again would have not been a bad thing at all. I love radiology. I have strong interest in it, but it may not have been my true passion.
So I think your point right there is spot on. And this concept of taking an L or a loss,
right,
or being quote unquote rejected, is actually good for us, because it's feedback, and our bodies, from what I remember of physiology, our bodies live on feedback. And we should take that L or that loss or that feedback and learn from it. And obviously, you did that. And obviously, those losses, and I didn't get into veterinary school the first number of times that I applied, but I learned from it. And I think it's important that things don't come easy. And of course, I am sure that both you and Phil had some greater challenges than others because of the backgrounds that you come from. But I think it's what you learn from those losses that make you a better person and help us as a human entity become better. It should not be easy. Everything should have a little bit of a challenge. I think that's how you build muscle. That's how you build strength. It's not just doing it once. It's the reps that you have to do repetitively. So.
I really enjoy that. And then what's the formula to success?
Right.
And when you look at those formulas to success, invariably, one of the components to success are episodes of failure, right? Because if you don't have that failure, you're exactly right. You don't get the feedback. And that could actually inhibit you from achieving your true potential.
Well, I think that's a good place to take a break for just a minute. We're not taking an L, we're taking a break. We're talking with Dr. Courtney Campbell on Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein. I'm here with Dr. Phil Nelson, and I just want to take a break in our conversation with Dr. Campbell, and I want to thank Nationwide. And we talked about Courtney's career path to get to where he is now as a boarded surgeon, but I really want to take a deeper dive to the spicy side of Courtney in just a moment. Phil, I just want to wrap up this segment. Anything you want to add before we start part 2 with Courtney Campbell?
No, I'm sorry I had to leave. I had a little small animal emergency in the house, and I had to I think he's going to be okay.
You think it's a reverse sneezing or what?
Reverse sneezing, yeah.
Oh man, so probably got a piece of dust up there. It's a splinter or something got in there. Hopefully it's not too bad.
Courtney, please invoice Dr. Nelson for your telehealth call that you just had. All right.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.